This is Progress Culture.
Progress Culture is a weekly happening where master drummer Paul F. Murphy and I share live improvised music and impromptu conversations with people from various fields and expertises about community, value, art, science, freedom, and progress for all. We are excited to share it all with you, so have a listen and see what's going on this week on Progress Culture. Now, let's get into the show. But first, let's hear some music. Hello, good people. Dominic Fragman and Paul Murphy here from Sonic Spirits, which includes poet Jere Carroll Murphy, and we are happy to welcome you to this week's episode of Progress Culture, and we are here with Tommy Luganbill, the director of all things. So it's a seam.
Yep. Except for this show. You are the director of this show.
I don't know. I kind of go. It usually goes where you take it when we're on this thing.
Oh, boy.
Did I put too much pressure on you?
Okay, I'm good.
All right.
Thanks for having me back.
We're excited to be here, fresh off of the 700 mile an hour bourbon event.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun.
That was awesome. A lot of money raised for Semper Fi Fund.
That's right.
Yeah, man.
It's a good cause.
It was a lot of fun, and we got to meet Art Knowles, who's a pretty accoladed aviator.
Yes.
The only guy ever to land a Harrier jet without an engine. That's pretty impressive.
That is what he said.
Remember when he told us? He said, so this guy, Art Knowles, he's a pretty renowned pilot, and he owns a Harrier jet, and when he was active duty in the military, he was a pretty renowned Harrier pilot, and he happened to land a Harrier pilot with complete engine failure, and he was over Richmond, Virginia, and he said he made a decision that to land the aircraft in an airfield, even though the mission always states that when engine failure, you eject and leave the plane. So he successfully landed the plane, he didn't eject, and as a result, he was up for two things. One was an award for being the only guy to land a Harrier jet without an engine, and the other one was they were going to court-martial him because he didn't follow the mission protocol.
Yeah.
So
he said he got a speeding ticket, too, one time in the air.
Yeah, for going 350 and a 250.
Yeah, for going too fast. Which is funny.
Anyway, we got to meet Art. We got to hang out with Scott Sanders. We got to hang out with Hank Caruso. That was pretty cool. Hank Caruso is also a very well-known, he's an aviator, an artist. He draws airplanes and does a lot of work with that. It's pretty cool.
Caricature airplanes.
Aricatures.
Aricatures, yeah.
Actually.
So they're not just pictures of airplanes. They're kind of cartoon realistic
it's like
depictions of them.
It would almost be like if aircraft Far Side, but there's
That's a good way to put it.
Something like that.
Yeah,
the presence.
It's cool.
Yeah.
So all that was a lot of fun. We are pressing on here into the next realms of progress culture discussions, and we would like to still invite you all to participate and thank you if you already are for being here and building a community that is aimed at facilitating positive progress in all ways, in all manners, and all types of society and disciplines. So if you have any ideas about how to do that, please share them with us, share them with each other, get in touch, and we'd love to hear from you. And as for now, I think what I kind of would like to jump into is I've been wondering, the question is the best way I can tell you what I've been wondering. So I wonder if you guys think, does democracy have sort of inherently baked into it, do you think, this idea that the cream rises to the top, that good ideas and good practices and things like that sort of become get put forward? What's best for all gets put forward. Do you feel like that is part of democracy?
Yeah, I feel definitely that that's part of democracy, that the good ideas do move forward. And, like right now, in the medical industry, the vaccine is moving forward, and it's something that seems to be needed and necessary and has saved quite a few people. So that's one good idea that they have moved forward.
Mm-hmm.
I think also with the cream rising to the top is also the powerful also rise to the very top. and control the direction of which the democracy is taking.
Do you think that is a paradox?
Yeah.
Is that paradox then, maybe it's not necessarily a part of democracy, but it certainly seems, is it part of the way that it's being practiced and carried out?
I mean, this is a very, very
You said we could talk about anything.
open-ended question. I have a lot of things coming into my head.
Well, you should share.
Number one, to Paul's point, unfettered democracy that doesn't have influence from other outside forces likely does result in the best possible solutions taking place. And the best possible solution doesn't always mean best for the individual, likely meaning the best for the sum of the parts. That's like unfettered democracy. At the same time, I look at what I would consider to be online democracies, which include things like Reddit and decentralized cryptocurrency exchanges, which are true democracies because there's no centralized exchange or force deciding what's interesting and what's not interesting. And sometimes what I see happen is, for example, there's maybe an art contest and they'll say, who drew the best picture of the dog? This is a real example. Which of these pictures is the best picture of a dog? And there's clearly one that's the best. It looks just like a dog. It's got perfect shadows. The penmanship and the pencils that the artist used are fantastic, and you can see the hair and the dog and and then there's another one that like a 5-year-old drew, and it looks like a stick figure. And the democratic voting system thinks it's funny to let the stick figure win the $10,000 prize for being the best picture. And the second place goes to the picture that everybody knows is the best. But they didn't vote for the best one. They voted for the one that they thought was funny. So sometimes when you have a democracy, these things can happen, which is, again, maybe that's what the will of the people was. But the best one didn't rise to the top. The one that everybody wanted to did. So it is a huge paradox.
I mean, indeed it is. Sometimes I guess I wonder when I think about that sort of thing, like, I don't think it's a revelation or some unique pondering that's going on, but I guess the question is that good? But it's more like, is there any reason to do anything different than that? Maybe that's the better question.
I guess I understand. I think what you're asking, in my head at least, I do. I have yet to see a better alternative, and that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But we've had a couple 100,000 years here on Earth. I don't know if there's a system that's better. Maybe just one that we haven't thought of yet. But I know we're not perfect. I know democracy isn't perfect, but it seems like all the other attempts that people made just haven't really worked out very well. Yeah.
It seems that way. Sometimes I think it's very hard to tell. I was recently with some people that were archaeologists, and they were talking about all the they said they're about to go to Belize on an archaeology project, and they were talking about how anywhere that you put a shovel in the ground, you're going to find artifacts down there, because there was just this tremendous amount of ceramics being made, and they became like, they're everywhere. They used them as fill in construction. So you find all these archaeological artifacts no matter where you go, right? And in America, it's not like that. And I don't know. Those are the kind of things that make me say, like, how do we know what we're finding and where, what was where and what they were doing with it, and how much of the land that people were living on and cultivating and using for different purposes and their practices that we discern from those things that we find is now underwater or, was frozen over forever. And we still haven't found the evidence that something different was going on yet that was, I don't know if that really matters, though. Here we are now with the knowledge that we have, practicing society and government and everything else as we do. And I would agree, it does not seem that we have yet found something that is sort of better suited for the needs of all than democracy.
I mean, the Romans had different phases, and one of them was a republic, right? So they actually had democracy, and then they went away from it, and they got emperors and Caesars, and then they went back to it, and then they became the Byzantines, and they got a king, and then there were kings everywhere, and then all of a sudden, everything went full circle back 2,000 years to democracy again. So like, is that because democracy is better? I don't know. Maybe we're just in another cycle. Maybe the emperors are coming again. I don't know.
I think we are in another cycle, but the part of the cycle I feel that needs to be addressed and eliminated is the cycle of war. Because that's been in this cycle the whole time.
Yeah.
And it still is. And is it really, really necessary? I mean, if we're going to talk about democracy, let's say, worldwide, instead of here, and a little bit there, and a tiny bit over here, how about a worldwide democracy where we can let go of the one thing that is really, to me, not helpful to anyone? And is not being driven by everyone on the planet.
But like, I mean, I know this is cliche because every space movie ever has talked about this, but I mean, what would it take to actually catalyze that? Would it actually be contact with another civilization on another planet, right? Because how do we get away from, like, in principle, it would be awesome if we could have just one worldwide democracy, but how do you convince everybody that that's a good idea unless some crazy thing happens where there's another civilization in another solar system or something?
The first thing that popped into my mind when you said that was, do you think that that's what will facilitate it because we may find some other society in another solar system or whatever, anywhere, that is practicing a form of government that is a democracy that facilitates the positive progress for all, and that we could then model a thing after that? Or is there another reason why you think that might catalyze?
No, I think it's just out of survival and necessity.
What do you mean?
I think a huge driving factor for creating any form of government is to establish territories and barriers to control resources. So it's just, I mean, that's thousands of years old, where it's, okay, this tribe is here because they need to be able to feed this many people and they need this much fresh water. So then they set up a barrier so that this group of people don't come across and take all the water, so that, they all die of thirst. So I think it's almost the same thing where if this other civilization were to present itself, all of a sudden our ideas of a metaphorical border between Canada and America doesn't matter anymore, because we're like, oh wait, we're not just trying to keep resources in this little area. We're trying to make sure that our oceans are safe, because this other planet or whatever, they may be friendly today, but they're running out of salt water, and they're looking at Earth and they're like, oh yeah, right? I think it's just it's a survival thing, and that I think that would drive it.
Interesting. So it's not so much the case that we're looking at some model of we're looking at competition.
Yeah. Because what if they're not a democracy? What if they've got some sort of king? A leader or something?
What if we could become... What if by that point we were the model and we had to maintain our situation to show other people that they didn't have to compete with us? I know that's pretty far-fetched.
No. Hey, why? Why? It's possible.
Yeah. Well, a while ago, I kind of went through this phase where I used to think reciprocation was like a great way to be in interpersonal relationships, whether or not it was romantic or otherwise, right? Where we're hanging out or walking down the street or in a restaurant or whatever, and I see you, I don't know you, and you wave and smile. And I wave and smile. Hey, that was, yeah. But if you don't wave and smile, I don't wave and smile. And I used to think that was like a cool way to be, right? And now I feel like, man, I need to be a leader. I need to be the one that waves and smiles so that maybe somebody else will wave and smile, because it is my tendency to wave and smile. So instead of reciprocation, I must be the leader of the interaction in a way. Right? And now you could take that into way more in-depth examples that probably seem more significant than a wave and a smile, but I think you get what I'm saying. So it still doesn't remedy the fact that we aren't the model yet. Right. But if we were to encounter something like that, man, that's because that must be part of this age-old issue of the war and the drawing the boundary lines and saying, if you mess with this, then it's on.
Yeah.
As opposed to I think we can share all this.
Look what happened here.
Yeah.
Right here. We didn't come from here.
Right.
We came to here and eliminated quite a bit of what was there. And now we've grown it to what it is today, present day. And yes, is it good? It's good for everyone that's here.
Yeah. It's so true.
But I mean, the way it became is that always a necessity is what I'm talking about. Like my wife Jere and I always talk about these things, and it always comes down to the spirituality of things versus the control that money has been put in place around the entire world. Instead of idea, you're talking about ideal. And ideal in what? Oh, that allows me to buy this. So we have to protect that. And if we need this, well, I think it's over there. It exists over there. So let's go get some lithium.
that because I can't remember what the tribe was, but I know that when the Dutch came over to New Amsterdam, which is now New York City, but when they came over to New Amsterdam, they met with the natives, and they basically thought, so the Dutch thought that they made an agreement that they would pay the Native Americans in whatever, beads or necklaces and pots and pans, and that in exchange the Dutch could have the land. And so the Dutch were like, cool, like they agreed to this. And then the next year the Native Americans, after leaving, came back, and then they came back again, and they came back again, and finally the Dutch were like, hey, we bought this. And they were like, what? They were like, what do you mean you bought this? they just couldn't comprehend the fact that they had bought it. So again, that's like back to your main question, Dominic, which is like, does the cream rise to the top in democracy? For who? Right? Because like he just said it. We're sitting here and we're like, oh, this is nice, but the Native Americans are like, well, that sucks.
Right. Well, I guess the other thing though is like, this is something that I thought that we would probably touch on a little earlier in this discussion, but that, are we talking about practiced democracy, or are we talking about true democracy? Or are we talking about the perception of democracy now? Because those are all different things, right? So we could talk about that ideal situation, but a lot of people don't like to talk about ideal situations because they feel like it's a waste of time because it's not the way it actually is. However, that's an important endeavor to engage in, because that's the part of imagination and creativity that you can engage in to get to the thing that's not a part of the pattern that you're trying to break, you know?
So honest question for both of you, whoever wants to answer. Assume in a perfect world, we were able to practice a true, pure democracy here in America. Do you think that a majority of participating participants in that democracy would make the right choices for the greater whole? Or would ultimately you find that a lot of decisions being made were not what was best for the greater whole?
I think a lot of decisions being made would be not for the greater whole.
In a true democracy, in an ideal way, like the true democracy also being implemented in a situation where the people or the participants or whatever you want to call them are all, I don't know how to say it, but like are on the same page.
See, that's the hard.
That's crazy to think about.
That's
but
the hard part, right?
I mean, like even something as simple as like, okay, so if part of the thing that we're talking about is control, and part of the thing that we're talking about is control over resources, which both of you have kind of touched on, then if there would also, in addition to being like this ability to practice a true democracy, there would also have to be some agreement on, I think, at least certain things that would put people in a way where it wasn't a competition of resources. Even if it was
it's like what Tommy was saying about New York and the Dutch and the Native Americans, and the Native Americans came back. You know, they had a few beads, but cool. They came back, though. Why did they come back? Well, Jerry would tell you, and I believe Tommy would probably say the same thing, is that the Native Americans came back because in their minds, no one owns the earth. The earth is spiritual. And it's in a sphere of spirituality. So they never really thought they sold anything.
you couldn't own. There was no private property because you couldn't own it.
Right.
And I think part of that comes from this, the spiritual aspect of that. The spiritual aspect, which also states that an understanding that the earth is living.
Right.
And we at least those of us who I think would say we are regular functioning members of society don't really believe in owning people. I don't believe in but we do believe in owning living things, so it'd still be kind of far-fetched. Right. But if we could get everyone to understand. Look, I had a conversation with somebody recently who's an engineer and a simulator coder and things like that. So a very hard science-minded person who was saying that in 2009 they discovered all these microbacteria that grow everywhere. They grow inside of rocks, and they eat and excrete electricity. And they're in places that are considered like power centers of Earth, like the Grand Canyon, Sedona, certain places like this. There's higher concentrations of these bacteria that are eating and excreting electricity. And all of these different little nodes create this electrical magnetic sphere. They're almost like neurons of the brain. The Earth's brain. So one of my things that I sort of stumbled into intuitively over the years was I don't really think I know of any inanimate thing that can create and sustain animate things. So something that is not living cannot create life, and then therefore does not sustain life. If the earth is loaded with living things that grow up out of the ground and fall out of the sky and grow apparently even inside of rocks, so that rocks are even something that creates and sustains life. Is any of this stuff really inanimate?
No, not really.
If we had that, if that were one of the things that became more a part of the page that everybody was on, would that deter them from thinking that there was competition for these resources or any reason to own them or treat the earth like it was something to, dig into until and take from until it was all gone?
Right.
Because it doesn't matter because it can't feel anything or doesn't think anything or.
But again, like you kind of touched on it, if a pure democracy were to work, everybody would have to have the same resources.
Right.
Because and the same not the same information, the same understanding. Because I can sit here on my ivory tower throne because I've been given the opportunity to learn about different things, and I can say things like, we are harming the environment, or I do believe you should get vaccinated, right? So I can say that because I've been afforded the opportunity to learn the reasons for that. If you were to go into different parts of this country, or even the state, some people have not been given the same opportunity to that education.
True.
And if you were to say what's best, they would be making their judgment based on what they know. And it's not fair for me to get mad. I mean, it frustrates me, but it's not fair for me to get mad if they don't believe the same thing that I do.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. But I would also say that I think part of the issue that we're having right now with the reason why our democracy isn't functioning properly has less to do with what the people think and more to do with what these people who are the control portions are doing.
I agree.
Now, I don't know, and we probably don't really have enough time to get into this part of the conversation, but it is something that that I have written down as a topic of discussion, is to sort of maybe try to define what we think these power people are, or what instead, because it comes across as such a conspiracy theory sounding thing when you just talk about those in control, those in the power. And I think that on one of these episodes coming up, maybe we can dig into that. to see how we can better talk about that. It's an important thing to do, to try to communicate with people in a way that it resonates with them. And I don't think the things that we're saying when we talk about that are like way into conspiracy theory land. I think, but there's probably a better way we can describe it, but I think
I think Tommy had a really good point with the education aspect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really believe that if we had very highly educated people in the jobs that certain people are in right now, things might tend to move progressively better at a little quicker rate than it has been.
Yeah. But that's hard, right? Because then we go back to Dominic's paradox, which is, I won't pick on any specific place, but if you have a democracy and everyone in a specific part of the country has to vote for a person to represent how they feel, if everybody in that community doesn't have the proper education, then they're going to elect a person who thinks and knows the exact same amount of information that they do.
They do.
And so how do you, because that's democracy, right? So people are really mad right now, and they're like, I can't believe this representative is so stupid. And then you're like, wait a second. 75,000 people voted them in.
Right.
That's 75,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not speaking for themselves. They're literally speaking for 75,000 people.
Yeah.
But that's democracy.
Yeah.
So it's not always the cream that goes to the top.
And I think that's fine. I don't know why I asked that question, really, as far as like, I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know if I feel that democracy brings the cream to the top. It was just seemed like a thing. And I guess what we're finding is that none of us do think that. It brings some things forward, but not necessarily the best of the best.
I know, but I'll go back to what I said earlier on, which is,
I don't know.
No, it's until I know democracy isn't perfect. Trust me, I could go for a long time about why it's not, but I've yet to read about or learn about anything better.
Better, right.
And that's where I keep coming back to. And that's lazy. It's lazy to say, well, this is the best we've got, so we should just deal with it.
I don't know if it is lazy. Look, I think I am in no way promoting any other form of governing or whatever. And I'm not saying that this is bad or this is good. I will say this. When we started the Spirit of Jazz and Democracy in 2016 and went to the Spirit of Innovation and Freedom and now Sonic Spirits and Progress Culture, part of the thing that we were saying was that democracy has had a goal of freedom, liberty, equality, all these things for all, and it hasn't yet achieved that. So what is at least sort of clear because of that is that the significance of innovation, like, okay, maybe it's not democracy and maybe it's not something totally different. Maybe we have a good framework and we still need to innovate so we can get to those points. We still require innovation in democracy. It might not mean that you call it something different and it functions a totally different way. It might mean that we cleaned it up or we scaled it back. Sometimes you take away things. Like think about some people, they bring something to market and they add all these features because they can, but it wasn't necessarily because the market was asking for it, right? So if you scale back those features, save some money, have a product that people want, and you've made an innovation in a way. And maybe it's scaling back, maybe it's scaling up, maybe it's changing directions altogether, but it at least seems clear that we could do something to improve it. And I think that probably one of the best ways is having these kinds of conversations. Maybe if we were all people that were wearing nice suits and involved with other people wearing nice suits that could bang gavels and make things happen, our conversations might seem to be a little bit more productive because they might go somewhere. Well, I think they are going somewhere. And I think that the overall point is the same as when we started, inviting people and thanking people for participating in this process, because you all might have an idea. Some 10-year-old might have an idea that we could at least get out in the open and discuss, and maybe it would go further up the chain, you know? So I would say, please feel free to continue to get in touch with us and each other and share those things. And I don't care if it comes through us or it goes through you and something completely different. We'd be happy to hear about it and know about it, or just see it take place because you were motivated to begin. So,
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you all for watching. We're going to do this again every single week that we can. Progress Culture every week. Tommy Luganbill, the man of all the hours. Paul Murphy, the most badass musician and human that you can find in any nook, in any cranny. We have North America's greatest hand model operating the camera back here. If you could see, she is Vanna Whiting it up. We'll have to figure out who the quintessential hand model is, so we can reference them and how Alex is better in the future, you know?
Yeah.
Like Gretzky or something.
Yeah, we'll look into that.
All right. Thank you all very much. We're happy to have you here, and we'll see you next time. Thank you all so much for being with us. We appreciate you sharing your time and consideration. Please feel free to reach out to Sonic Spirits and Progress Culture at sonic-spirits.com and progressculture.org. We'd love to hear from you if you're working on something awesome, or you have ideas for future shows, or you just like to say hello. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Much love. See you soon. Thank you.